Well, good morning. It's Sunday morning, getting ready for church, and I thought, I haven't done a video in a while, so I thought I might do a little bit of a video update. I didn't really have a whole lot more to talk about on rabbits, so I thought I'd show you something else I've been working on, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about my Coturnix Quail setup. It's kind of a new thing for me, just kind of started into it, so I thought I would share with the people that have been watching my videos. These are really easy birds to raise. It's really a great thing. They take up a very small footprint, and well, let me just get into it and I'll show you what I got. Alright, this is my Coturnix Quail setup. It's a PVC rack that I built and just hung the cages on them, make them very much like I do my rabbit cages. They're just smaller. I think these are 24 by 24. Actually, they're like 23 by 23 because I've got these trays underneath them and I want to make sure it overhangs a little bit on each side to catch all the droppings. So, it's really a pretty simple setup. I've got these in my garage right now. I may be moving them outside under some protection because it's getting ready to be summertime now. Didn't know how well they'd do in the wintertime outside, but you can see I've got 4 females and a male. These little feeders I made just out of Tupperware containers. I've tried, I'll show you down here, these are the last babies that I bred, or that I hatched and raised up. They're, I don't know, 3-4 weeks old. And these little commercial feeders like this is what I'm using for them right now, but you can kind of tell they waste a ton of food in those feeders, especially the bigger ones. So I made these little feeders out of somebody's, I can't remember, I saw a couple people post videos. I think these might be better if they're a little bit taller, but basically I just drilled I want to say it was I don't know what that is, a 1/2 inch hole, big enough for them to get their heads in the sides, and then I fill the feeder up to about where the hole is, and they waste a lot less food that way. It just seems to work out better. I've got these little waterers here that are just little cups. You can see there's one. See that little yellow knob in there, and basically what happens is they go over there and peck at that little yellow knob, and it lets water out. And I just made these out of old coffee cans, drilled a hole, put some Teflon tape around it, and screwed them in. So those work great. If you put like a chicken waterer in there, they mess it up quick. It doesn't take but an hour, and it's full of droppings and things like that. So another thing I've done out of other people's recommendations is built these. I kind of hang them at an angle. I didn't build the cage on an angle. What I did is I hung it on an angle. I don't know if you can see that or not, but strapped it to the top of the rack here, and then about 2 inches lower in the front, so the eggs all roll to the front. I put these egg catchers on the front. There's a gap, you can see right here under the cage, big enough, I don't know, what is that, 1/4 inch maybe, big enough for the eggs to roll out and fall into these little catchers. I'm not convinced on how well this works because, let's see if you can see this or not, but it tends to be more of a poop catcher than an egg catcher. A lot of the eggs don't really roll that well. They get hung up behind the feeders and things, and I like the idea of putting it on an angle because the eggs do roll to the front, but I'm almost thinking about just getting rid of these egg catchers altogether. All their droppings seem to just, you can see on this one, all their droppings just seem to kind of gather up in the egg catcher. It doesn't really work that great, but the whole angle of the cage works pretty good. Other than that, I've got a couple of white ones in here, a couple of different kinds. And maybe it's just these, I don't know, but the white ones have not been as good of producers. You can see these are babies. I incubated 20 eggs and I got 11 to hatch. So not the best hatch rate, but not bad. But all of them are brown. I've got one that's got a white chest, so he's probably a mix, between this. But they don't seem to be as prolific, and they lay plenty of eggs, but they don't seem to be nearly as fertile. So anyway, the setup's pretty simple. It's just PVC. I just cut it to basically the width of the cages, a little bit wider. I think I gave an inch on each side or something, and I just hung the cages with some wire, drilled a hole in the PVC in the front, and just wired it to the rack. It's just a simple PVC setup. Now, one thing I didn't do that I should do, back up a little bit so you can see kind of the whole setup. I did not glue any of the joints because I want to be able to take it apart, and I think that's fine with the uprights, but really the side joints I should have glued because I've got caster wheels on the bottom, you can see, so I can roll this whole thing, but the problem is that when I pull on it, and let's see if you can see this, it wants to twist side to side because these are not glued. If I would have glued these side pieces and kept them solid, I think it would have given a little bit more stability. You know, on a side note, I did try something very similar to this with rabbits when I first got them. Had them in my garage with dropping pans underneath them in a PVC rack. It worked okay. The PVC really needed to be braced a little bit. I just tied it to the wall and it worked fine. It kept it from wobbling too much. But the problem with that is just that rabbits are incredibly good. It's almost like they try to go over the edge of the, you know, they just urinate over the edge of that tray. So you have to have urine guards, and it was just a huge mess trying to keep up with emptying those trays out. They're much better outside in the tarp setup I've got, and you can kind of watch some of my other videos and see how that's set up. But much easier to keep clean, much easier to take care of. It was not a good setup for rabbits. But for the quail, it works really well. You know, their droppings for the most part all fall right into the cage. You can see the floor around here. I haven't cleaned it up in a couple of days. That's a piece of trash plastic bag I need to pick up and throw away. But yeah, there's a little bit of a mess on the floor, but it's pretty easy to clean up. For the most part, you can just sweep it right there. I'm not sure what happened right there, but you know, a little bit of you know, move the cages out of the way, sweep and mop it. One thing I will say, I mean, these birds are pretty easy to take care of. You just keep them fed and watered. I just free feed them, free water them. You can see these little guys here using the water. They go up and peck at that little yellow thing inside the cup, and they get themselves a drink. Anyhow, pretty easy to take care of. Then one thing they do need is light, and since I've got them in my garage, you know, this whole setup here, it gets pretty dark in here if I turn all the lights off in the garage. So what I did is I got these cheap, you know, grow lights is what they are. They're just T8 bulbs, and I just lay them on top of the cage. I plugged them into a timer that turns them on at 6 o'clock in the morning and turns them off at 10 o'clock at night. And these guys produce, out of the 8 females that I have that are egg laying age, again, I've got 4 females and 1 male in each cage. I get 6 eggs a day almost every day out of these things. I've got a couple I think are a little bit older. I may need to call out whenever these guys get pretty big, in about, I don't know, they should be laying eggs here in about 3 or 4 weeks. They're about 4 or 5 weeks old right now, so I may trade them out with a couple of the females. But they get, you know, this top cage has got some younger birds in it. They just started laying eggs not too long ago, and I get about almost 4 eggs a day guaranteed out of that cage, sometimes 3. The eggs are good to eat. They're small. They're about it takes about 3 or 4, probably about 4 to make this regular size of a regular chicken egg. I'll show you a couple of things I do with the eggs here in a little bit, but anyway, that's pretty much the setup. Very easy. My thought is, you know, it takes about 14 days to hatch the young out when you incubate them. I've got eggs saving right now that I'm going to incubate probably next weekend. Set in the incubator. It takes about 18 days for them to hatch out, and then about 6 weeks later, they're that size and ready to you know, butcher, bacon wrap, and throw on the grill. So very easy meat source, very easy egg source. I get more eggs than I can use out of just 8 female birds. That's really about all there is to it. So I might do some more videos on these guys and some specifics on what to do with them. But as far as care for them, it's not hard. I haven't kept them outside in real cold temperatures, but they do fine right here in the garage. It gets down in the 40s sometimes. It's in the wintertime. When I first got them, it was getting down in the 40s, and they were fine. Gets up in the 80s. They don't seem to be stressed out by the heat. Nothing. They're hardy little birds. I haven't lost one yet. They don't really fly. You know, I don't really handle them much, but you know, you can stick your hand in there and just grab them, pick them up. They're not too hard to handle. Pretty easy to manage. I've had 1 or 2 get out every once in a while. What they do is they end up just kind of floating to the ground like a controlled descent, and then they stand around all confused until you pick them back up and put them back in the cage. So I did try some, you know, I put this stiffer wire on the front. I will tell you, my cages are made out of hardware cloth because it's so much cheaper. It's 1/4-inch hardware cloth. It's just a box wrapped around. You can see, like I said, very similar to the rabbit cages, tied on with J-clips, clipped all the way around. One thing I did is I made sure that when I wrapped back up a little bit so you can see, when I wrapped the cages, I made sure that I had a long enough piece on the bottom, and when I see if I can show this, you might be able to see. I wrapped them, I took the long piece and did it this way around the top and front so that I'd had enough to hang off and make this without having to clip this egg catcher on. It's just part of the cage. You can see I just bent it, and it's, oh, I don't know, 2 inches wide, something like that. But again, I'm not real convinced that these egg catchers are that great of an idea. I end up having to open the cage and get most of them. I did put this, the stronger, I think it's 14 gauge maybe, 1 inch by 2 inch wire on the front. They can stick their heads through there. I may work on, especially if I get rid of these egg catchers, I did try some hang on the outside feeders. They can stick their heads through these holes and eat just fine, but it was getting in the way of the egg catcher down here, so it didn't really work that well for me. And if I get rid of these egg catchers, I may go back to trying something like that. But the biggest reason for putting this on the front was just for stability. The hardware cloth is great. It works fine, but if you make the whole thing out of hardware cloth, it tends to be just, it doesn't sit square. It wants to, twist to one side or the other, and this front piece just gives it a lot of added structure. But no sense in making the whole cage out of that. First of all, it's too big for their feet. You can see they do okay on this 1/2 inch hardware cloth, but anything bigger than that, or 1/4 inch I think it is, but anything bigger than that, they have a hard time walking on it. So they didn't look comfortable in that, so I switched up. When I think the first cage I had them in was a rabbit cage, and they did not look comfortable, and they had a hard time walking on it. And I switched up pretty quick to this 1/4 inch hardware cloth floor. So anyway, I think that may be it. I mean, you can do any number of things. I have not tried like chicken nipple feeders, or waterers, but I've seen videos, people on YouTube that have done it and said that they work just fine. So I may go to that. I'm pretty happy with these little cups though. They seem to work great. They just, you don't set them down too low in the cage. About you can see this bird here, about the height where their head is, so that they can get into it very easily. And there she is. She's going to get a drink. They don't hardly keep any water in them, but they figure it out pretty quick and they drink it no problem. And like I said, I just use coffee cans, but you could probably find a better solution. Something maybe holds a little bit more water. You could rig these up. These little cups came with and I can't remember where I got them, but I'll look it up if anybody needs to know. But they came with a clip that you could clip them onto like 3/4 inch PVC and run a PVC pipe all the way up the side with one main waterer at the top, and clip these on, and they would work just fine. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Like I said, I'll give you an update on some of the eggs here real quick, and then we'll do some more videos on these. Maybe I'll video some incubation. It's first eggs I ever incubated, well, since I was a kid, and we got some Easter ones, but for the most part, first eggs I ever incubated, it was pretty easy. Wasn't hard. Only got about a 50% hatch rate out of it, but you know what? Set 20 eggs, and if you get 10 or 11 birds, then no loss. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to experiment with some things and see if I get some better ink. And again, I don't know if it was because the white ones just aren't that fertile because I didn't get any white babies, or if it's there's a number of different things. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful and gives you some more ideas on some more meat you can raise for your family. Get meat and eggs out of this. If you live in town like me, it's hard to do chickens. My town does allow chickens, but you have to have a permit and certain sizes, and it's there's a lot of money that goes into building a chicken coop. This was cheap. I think the whole cage setup. I already had the rabbit cage wire that I used for the fronts of these, and I had to buy the hardware cloth, but it was like $10 or $15 a roll. I mean, it was cheap. So I built all these cages for, I don't know, 11. I bet they're probably $6, $7 cages each, maybe. And the lights were $5 or $6. They're just cheap grow lights, and all this stuff was not. There's no major expense. The biggest expense was really these trays, believe it or not. And you could rig up something different. Just get your trays before you get your cages, and build your cages to the size of the tray. And like I said, you do want to have maybe build them just an inch smaller on each side, so that the tray easily covers everything. But these were specifically for rabbit cages, or rabbit cage dropping pans. I had a hard time finding anything else that would work. And they were maybe $20 a tray. They're expensive, but they do a good job. And I empty them out and throw them in the compost pile about every 2 or 3 days. Whenever I walk out the garage door and I can smell them, and as long as you keep it dry and there's not like water in the trays themselves, it's really not too bad. But after a while, it does start to build up, and when I start to smell it a little bit after 3 or 4 days, I'll take them out and throw them in the compost pile and, you know, kind of hose them out a little bit, bring them back in and stick them back in. So pretty easy. Very definitely something you might want to consider if you're looking at, you know, raising some of your own food. Okay, well, like I said, I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on what the eggs look like. These are the quail eggs. You know, they vary a little bit in size. Looks like I don't have any that are hugely different. Pretty little eggs, little spotted eggs. A little bit higher yolk content than what a regular chicken egg does, but you can kind of see, I don't know if you can tell on the video or not, but I have to have some chicken eggs. These are grade A large chicken eggs, and that's a pretty good sized chicken egg. But you have a chicken egg and a quail egg. So you can kind of tell the size difference there. It takes about, you know, like I said, about 4 of these to make one chicken egg. But you get so many of them that it's just super easy. Okay, these quail egg scissors are a lifesaver because, you know, you try to crack these eggs. They've got a really thick membrane in them, and they're really hard. If you're going to scramble them, it's no big deal. But if you want to fry them like you would like a sunny side up or something like that, it's almost impossible to get them out of there without the yolk breaking. You can take a knife and kind of cut the top of the shell off, but these scissors work great. And all you do is you open them up, you stick the egg, small end first, up inside this hole, and then you just, you know, snip off the top of the egg and dump them out. They're pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to use. And I think these were maybe $10 on Amazon, but well worth it if you're going to be cooking a lot of these eggs. What I typically do when I cook the quail eggs is I'll crack, you know, 5 or 6 of them, chop the tops of them off, dump them in a bowl, and then dump the whole bowl into a frying pan and fry them as one egg with like multiple yolks. You'll get one, you know, pretty good size egg, and it'll have multiple yolks inside of it. So they're also great hard-boiled. They make great little bite-sized hard-boiled eggs. They take about 4 minutes. I boil my water, throw the eggs in, and about 4 minutes later they're done. A little bit of a pain to peel at first, but once you figure it out, it's pretty easy. So I actually deviled some. I did about 30 of them one time for Easter and took them to my sister's house for her barbecue. Deviled them, you know, cut them, you know, peeled them, cut them in half, took the yolks out, deviled them, put them back in. It wasn't too bad. Peeling the eggs is the hardest part, but man, they make great little deviled eggs. Just little, like I said, little bite-sized, small deviled eggs, and everybody just raved over them, thought they were just fantastic. So that's another idea. I tried pickling some, but you know, I've never really had pickled eggs, and maybe it's just not my deal, but they just didn't turn out really that good. They were okay. They just weren't kind of rubbery. Don't know how to explain it. They weren't bad. They just weren't great. If you really like pickled eggs, then maybe this is a thing. You know, that's a thing that you might like. But so anyway, hopefully that helps and gives you a little bit of an idea on something else you can add to your backyard homestead, especially if you live in town like me and it's hard to have chickens or ducks. So thanks again for watching. Hope you learned something, and please feel free to ask questions. Leave comments. Love hearing them. Even some of those that might get a little bit more hateful at times, still like hearing other people's opinions. So thank you very much.